do you, like, what's in, if somebody were to, pull out a booklet, right, of your method, because you've got it memorized, but I'm sure most people don't, even
Right.
who use it, don't have it memorized. But if somebody were to bring out a booklet and there's 5 pages with 5 diagrams,
Right.
and they were like, I mean,
Yeah. How would it fit?
yeah, how would it fit? Like this week, Israel's bombing Lebanon. I'm sure
Okay.
by the time we show this, something different will be happening. Like, what would somebody do? They pull out the booklet and then they say, okay, we're looking for wholeness. We're looking for different ways to look at this.
Right.
What yeah, what would I do?
Okay. Let me give an example. Since you work with fascism, let me show you where fascism comes from in the stages of growing up. Because what people don't realize is that each stage of growing up produces a different type of worldview. It has, therefore, a different political system. And in particular, fascism comes from the stage that I call the mythic stage. And the
Mm,
thing that makes the mythic stage so interesting is, well, we have our archaic stage, which is the first year or so of life. And it's generally in our own evolutionary history, it was right when we were coming out of the great apes. And so we call that an archaic stage, or Gene Gebser called it the archaic stage, because the apes are fairly archaic, and so were early humans. I mean, we didn't really speak very well. We didn't have that much artwork, or we didn't have that much religion. Um, and so that was the archaic stage. And then and the mind, our mind wasn't really differentiated from the world. And it's important not to confuse that with a unity consciousness. There
okay.
are a lot of great philosophers make that fundamental confusion. I call it the retro-romantic fallacy, because it's particularly the romantic philosophers that think we all started out in a primordial paradise of Eden, and we somehow screwed it up, dropped the ball, particularly with the rise of the ego or rationality. Those are the two that are most picked on by romantic theorists. And that split us apart from our primordial unity. But it did nothing of the sort at all. I mean, if you look at what's called the Great Chain of Being, for example, which is a list of ontological levels of reality that almost all mystics come up with. The Christian mystic version, for example, is matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit. That's the great chain of being. And it turns out that we evolve through those levels of being. So when we were just one with the material world, that was our archaic stage. And then when we moved up to body, or the living, breathing, reproducing body, that was the magic stage. And because we were just separating from the environment, we couldn't really distinguish our mind from the world around it. So linguists say the signifiers that we used, the words or symbols that we used to represent, like a tree or a mountain or a rock, we couldn't distinguish the word from the thing. And we see that in really our oldest forms of religion have that confusion. So for example, in voodoo, if you get mad at a person and you want to hurt them, you make a doll that looks like the person. And because you can't really distinguish the doll from the person, you think that if you take a knife and stab the daylights out of the doll, it'll kill the person. That's because you can't distinguish the signifier from the referent, or the object that's being signified.
Right. And in Catholicism, they have transubstantiation, right? Are you literally eating
That's right.
the flesh
And
of Christ? Yeah.
all of our early religions have a great deal of magic. And particularly when we get to the next stage, the mythic stage, which I'm going to say also fascism comes from, the mythic stage, we ourselves can no longer do magic, but we project the capacity to do magic onto all these supernatural beings, gods, goddesses, nature spirits. And if we pray to them correctly, we can convince them to do magic on our behalf, like make the crops go, or get me a new car, or get me the girl, or get me the guy, or whatever it is. And if we pray correctly and fervently enough, and if we believe religiously enough, they'll actually do that for us. And that's why many developmental psychologists call the mythic stage the mythic literal stage, because Zeus is real and he actually exists and he's living on Mount Olympus. And Aphrodite is real and she actually exists and she's living on Mount Olympus. And Mars, and on and on and on through several dozen gods and goddesses. And that's also where our approach to a god as a supernatural being began, and all of our major world religions have some sort of approach to some sort of supernatural god or goddess or being. And that's
But I'm also hearing not just supernatural, but supernatural and concrete, right? They're supernatural, but they walk the earth.
That's right. That's why they're called mythic literal.
Yep.
And Piaget actually calls it concrete operational, because we're operating on them, but they are concrete realities. And so when the rational stage began to emerge, which was particularly around 1600 with the beginning of the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment in the modern West, we had the emergence of a rationality which could create rules of logic and mathematics and things like that. And science, because it was rational, just disagreed with all of that supernatural stuff. And so we got the classic science versus religion battle. But
I want to back up about fascism, though. So fascism, right? There are gods that walk the earth. Well, no, mythicism, there are gods that walk the earth. Fascism and fan culture is people who walk the earth are godlike.
That's right.
Which is not a very big leap, right? It's actually some very similar assumptions. And what I just got is a lot of people who are disdainful of fascism or any kind of religious-based ideology will come back with a rationalist disdain. Like, oh, they're so stupid. Don't they see this is just a regular person? I can give you some facts, and they're just not even they're not even having the same conversation.
That's right. And you can use a rational mode of thinking and adopt a mythic object of thought. And we call that rational mythic. And that tends to be what things like fascism are, because they talk very rational, but they're talking about myths. They're talking about lies. And I remember Mikhail Gorbachev, the brilliant ballet dancer, he, of course, defected to the United States. And I saw an interview with him once, and they said, what was it like living in Russia? And he said, oh, it was horrible, because you had to wake up every day and adopt a lie. And I thought, wow, that's what it's like to live under a mythic fascist belief structure. Rational, and then what happens after rational, the pluralistic stage, is people start looking at all this multicultural different types of beliefs that they've come up with, and they can get confused by them because there are so many of them. And so they try to bring them together, but they can't do it because they're not cognitively advanced enough. And that's what the next stage does, the integral stage. It looks at all these multicultural paradigms and it brings them together into a single unified state.
Very interesting.
In the Western world right now, the percentage of the population that remains at mythic literal is around 40 to 50%. And that includes most of our fundamentalist basic religions. And then the percent of at rational is 40 to 50%. And then the percent at post-conventional or postmodern or multicultural is around 23%. And then the percent of the population at the first integral stage, we call it the teal stage, is about 5 to 8%. And the percentage of population at the highest general stage, we call it turquoise, or the post or the cross paradigmatic stage, is only 0.5%. So, because I wanted to talk about how we can understand fascism by understanding these stages of development, because it is a system of systemic mythic laws. It is a part of the mythic literal structure. And we have to understand that if we want to change somebody and get them out of fascism, we want to get them out of that stage of development. So the first thing we would do is assign them exercises or practices that they could do to start thinking purely rationally or logically and not relying on these fake lies and mythic stories. And when you, I mean, these mythic stories take all sorts of different forms, but just listening to Mikhail Baryshnikov talk about the lies that he had to learn and repeat and actually believe each and every day of his life. I mean, it's a horrifying story, but you see exactly what those mythic stories are like.
I went to the Soviet Union in the 80s, and the museums were full of these very mythic posters, you know, these heroic workers with the symbol. I mean, it's not that I think that there's no propaganda where I am, but I could see the direct mythology archetypes being drawn on.
Right. And so if we want to get somebody out of that state, we have to get them out of that stage. Or they're, no matter how much you tell them to learn to say something differently, they'll be saying it through a mythic mind. And that just isn't good.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, well, and also the whole theory of development is you have to complete a stage before you can go to the next one. You can't be yanked into it. So like, is there a developmental task that they need to complete in the mythic stage before they can be ready for the rational stage? It's a very interesting inquiry. Thank you for this.
Right.
It's given me a whole new way of thinking about things, even about how impatient I am with people in the rational stage,
Right.
and how disdainful they can be of people in the mythical stage, right?
Right.
Or people who are anti-fascist but do hero worship of their own leaders.
Right. Well, if you actually want to study some of this, I would recommend starting with the works of Jane Lovinger. She wrote a book called Ego Development, and her model is the most widely used model of ego development in the world. Around the world, she's the most, and the test that she devised to determine what stage a person is at is the most widely used developmental stage test to help determine where somebody's at. And she also gives exercises and practices that you can do to get from one stage to the next. So you can get an enormous amount of very useful material from just studying her work. And I highly recommend it. And of course, there are other people that do a lot of work. So Kohlberg has worked very well on the moral stages, and the orange, we call it, or the amber, we call the fascist stage and amber stage. There's an enormous amount of approaches to getting past that amber stage and getting into orange rational. And so
All right. I'm gonna
Wilber,
look that up.
KJ, Arrietty, all of them are very helpful. But you can start to see
Yep.
the general approach of the usefulness of an integral approach, where we look at each of these sections and say, okay, which one is most decisive in determining this problem? And
That's
then we
amazing.
go right after it.
All right, we are getting toward the end of our time.
That's
Um,
it.
Now, we didn't talk about this before. Do you have a free gift that people can opt into to get on your email list? Do you have something that people can sign up for that will have them get something and then they'll be on your email list?
Yeah, we have a website called integrallife.com, and they can go there and generally find out how to sign up.
Okay, very good. And I'll also work with your assistant to see if there's anything more specific that we should share with people. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ken.
Of
I
course.
reviewed things that I knew in college, but I also really learned some new stuff here that's very,
Great.
very intriguing. So thank you so much for your
You
time.
bet.